January 21st, 1968. A United States Air Force B-52G Stratofortress climbs out of Plattsburgh Air Force Base in New York and turns north into the black winter sky above the American Northeast. The aircraft is designated Hobo 28. Its crew of 7 is executing a standard rotation. The flight plan calls for a long polar arc, threading north toward Greenland before curving back south over the Arctic ice cap. The round trip is expected to take approximately 24 hours. Inside the bomb bay of Hobo 28, secured within heavily engineered steel and titanium casings, are 4 B-28 thermonuclear gravity bombs. Each weapon carries a variable yield selector dial that allows the arming crew to dial in a detonation range between 70 kilotons and 1.1 megatons of explosive force. At its maximum setting, a single weapon aboard that aircraft contains approximately 75 times the destructive energy that was released over Hiroshima in August 1945. There are 4 of them. This is not unusual. It is, in fact, entirely routine, because at this precise moment in January 1968, somewhere over the Arctic, there are always aircraft exactly like Hobo 28, armed, aloft, and waiting. To understand why, and to understand the full magnitude of what is about to happen in the freezing darkness above the Greenlandic coastline, you have to understand the operational logic that put those 4 weapons in that bomb bay in the first place. You have to understand the classified political arrangement that the United States government maintained for 4 decades. You have to understand the 700 men who would spend the following 9 months in temperatures of minus 30 degrees Celsius, shoveling radioactive wreckage into steel drums on a frozen bay. And you have to understand why one of the 4 weapons aboard Hobo 28 has never been found. If you find the hidden mechanics of Cold War deterrence and the classified programs that shaped global history to be worth understanding in detail, consider subscribing as we continue to reconstruct these declassified files. The institutional architecture that places Hobo 28 over the Arctic in January 1968 is called Operation Chrome Dome. It was born from a single, brutally simple operational problem that confronted Strategic Air Command in the mid-1950s. The United States nuclear deterrence posture in the early Cold War rested on a fleet of land-based bombers stationed at air bases across the American continent and across Europe. The logic was straightforward. If the Soviet Union initiated aggression against the West, those bombers would lift off, penetrate Soviet air defenses, and deliver their thermonuclear payloads against designated targets. The threat of this retaliation was the mechanism of deterrence. As long as the Soviets believed that bombers would survive to strike back, they would be deterred from striking first. But in 1957, the Soviet Union detonated its first operational intercontinental ballistic missile above the atmosphere, and the calculus of deterrence immediately collapsed. A ballistic missile launched from Soviet territory can reach an American airbase on the eastern seaboard in approximately 30 minutes. An intercontinental missile targeted at a base further west might take slightly longer. But the critical reality was inescapable. The window between the detection of a Soviet launch and the impact of its warheads on American soil was measured in minutes, not hours. A B-52 bomber requires approximately 15 minutes to be fully checked, armed, fueled, and launched. In a scenario where Soviet missiles are inbound, those 15 minutes do not exist. The bombers would be destroyed on the ground before a single aircraft could get airborne. Strategic Air Command's solution was elegant in its brutality. If the bombers cannot survive on the ground long enough to launch in response to a Soviet first strike, you remove them from the ground entirely. You put them in the air before the war starts. You keep them there continuously. Operation Chrome Dome launched as a formal program in 1960. At its operational peak, Strategic Air Command maintained a rotation of fully armed B-52 bombers continuously aloft over the Arctic, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The aircraft refueled in the air from KC-135 tanker aircraft over the North Atlantic, never landing, never stopping. Crews rotated every 24 hours. The patrols ran in precisely choreographed sequences along pre-plotted routes that kept the aircraft within striking range of Soviet territory at all times. The strategic logic was airtight. A Soviet first strike that obliterated every American airbase could not simultaneously destroy the aircraft already in the air. Those aircraft would survive the strike, receive their emergency launch codes through the extremely low-frequency communication networks, and execute their retaliatory mission. The deterrents could not be decapitated. But there was a dimension to Chrome Dome that the United States government handled with extreme diplomatic care. The polar patrol routes required the B-52s to fly directly over Allied territory, over Iceland, over the Canadian Arctic, and most critically, over Greenland. This created a profound political problem that went entirely unresolved for the duration of the program. Denmark governed Greenland as an autonomous territory within the Danish Commonwealth, and the Danish government had publicly established a clear and non-negotiable national policy: no nuclear weapons on Danish soil. This was not an informal preference. It was a cornerstone of Danish political identity and a publicly stated position of every Danish government since the late 1950s. The Thule Air Base Agreement, signed in 1951, had granted the United States operational rights to maintain the massive strategic installation carved into the Greenlandic ice sheet. But that agreement had been negotiated before the full architecture of nuclear deterrence was understood by either party, and it had never been formally amended to address the presence of nuclear weapons. By the early 1960s, Strategic Air Command's bombers were flying directly over Danish territory on every Arctic patrol. They were flying directly over Thule Air Base itself on the standard Chrome Dome routing. And they were doing so while carrying multiple thermonuclear weapons. The Danish government was not formally informed of this operational reality. The United States maintained its standard nuclear posture, known internally as the policy of neither confirm nor deny. Under this framework, the United States officially refuses to confirm or deny the presence of nuclear weapons on any specific aircraft at any specific location. It is a diplomatic mechanism precisely designed to allow operational flexibility without formal acknowledgement of arrangements that might be politically impossible to admit. The practical result was that for nearly a decade, the United States conducted nuclear-armed overflights of Danish territory in direct contradiction of explicit Danish domestic law, and managed the political exposure of this arrangement through deliberate institutional silence. This is the fault line running directly beneath the fuselage of Hobo 28 when it departs Plattsburgh on the night of January 21st. The aircraft is carrying 4 thermonuclear weapons over Danish territory. It is doing exactly what dozens of aircraft before it have done without incident. Tonight is supposed to be exactly the same. The fire starts quietly, almost trivially, in the navigator's compartment. A foam seat cushion has been placed too close to a heating vent. The heat gradually ignites the cushion material. In the enclosed, pressurized fuselage of a B-52 flying at altitude, a foam fire is not a minor incident. The burning material releases dense, chemically toxic smoke that begins filling the crew compartment with alarming speed. The aircraft commander, Major Lawrence Messenger, recognizes the severity within minutes. The crew attempts to control the fire with the equipment available aboard the aircraft. They cannot. The smoke volume is overwhelming, and the burning material is spreading. Within a short time, the heat begins degrading the electrical systems running through the forward fuselage. Critical instrumentation begins to fail. Messenger makes the decision to divert to Thule Air Base. The base is the closest available landing field. It has a runway capable of receiving a fully laden B-52, and it has the emergency infrastructure to handle the situation. He radios an emergency declaration and begins his descent toward the Greenlandic coastline. But the fire is ahead of him. The electrical degradation is accelerating. Hydraulic systems are compromised. The aircraft is becoming increasingly difficult to control as its automated flight management systems lose power, and the manually operable backups are tested to their limits. By the time Hobo 28 is in its descent toward Thule, Major Messenger has concluded that he cannot safely land the aircraft. He orders the crew to bail out. 7 of the 8 crew members successfully eject from the stricken aircraft. The 8th, Sergeant Leonard Shepard, is unable to reach his ejection station in time. He goes down with Hobo 28. The aircraft, now unmanned and burning, crosses the Greenlandic coastline at low altitude and impacts the surface of North Star Bay at approximately 15:39 local time on January 21st, 1968. It is traveling at high speed. The conventional high explosive initiators surrounding the fissile cores of all 4 B-28 thermonuclear weapons detonate on impact. The fuselage tears apart. The bomb casings rupture. The bay is destroyed. There is no nuclear detonation. But the absence of a nuclear yield should not be confused with safety. What has just happened on the frozen surface of North Star Bay is, by every accurate measure, a catastrophe. Why did 4 thermonuclear weapons, subject to the massive mechanical shock of a high-speed aircraft impact followed by the detonation of their own conventional explosive charges, fail to produce a nuclear detonation? The answer is engineering, and understanding it is essential to understanding precisely what was distributed across that bay. A thermonuclear weapon requires a sequence of events executed with extraordinary physical precision. At the center of the weapon is the fissile pit, typically a hollow sphere of plutonium-239 or highly enriched uranium. Surrounding the pit is an array of high explosive lenses arranged in a mathematically precise geometric pattern. These lenses are designed to detonate in perfect simultaneity, within microseconds of each other across the entire surface of the pit. The simultaneous detonation compresses the fissile material inward with a symmetrical, perfectly shaped implosion wave. This compression drives the material past its critical mass threshold, initiating the fission chain reaction that serves as the primary trigger for the thermonuclear secondary stage. The operative word is simultaneity. If a single explosive lens in the array detonates even fractionally out of sequence with the others, the compression wave is asymmetrical. The pit is not uniformly compressed. The geometry of the implosion fails. Supercriticality is not achieved. The weapon does not detonate. In the crash of Hobo 28, the conventional explosives surrounding the pits detonated. But the shock of the aircraft impact, the mechanical destruction of the fuselage, and the cascading electrical failures that preceded impact all combined to shatter the precise firing coordination required for simultaneous lens detonation. The explosives went off, but they went off badly, unevenly, without the engineered precision required to generate nuclear yield. What this means is that the conventional explosives succeeded in doing exactly what they were designed to prevent. They burst open the weapon casings and distributed the internal components of 4 thermonuclear weapons across a wide area of frozen sea ice. Plutonium-239, beryllium reflector components, tritium reservoirs, uranium secondary stage material. All of it was now scattered across North Star Bay. Plutonium-239 has a radioactive half-life of 24,100 years. Inhaled as a microscopic particle into lung tissue, it lodges permanently and emits alpha radiation into the surrounding cellular structure for the remainder of the host's life. Beryllium dust inhaled into the lungs causes a severe and irreversible pulmonary condition known as chronic beryllium disease. Neither substance announces its presence. Both are invisible, odorless, and detectable only with specialized equipment. Put yourself in the position of the base commander at Thule Air Base receiving the crash report within minutes of the impact. The contamination zone is out in the ice of North Star Bay. It is January. The temperature at the crash site is approaching minus 30 degrees Celsius. The sun has not risen above the Greenlandic horizon and will not for weeks. Polar night is absolute. You have a debris field of unknown extent scattered across frozen sea ice, and you have no idea precisely what chemical compounds from 4 ruptured thermonuclear weapons have been distributed across it. The United States Air Force activates its Nuclear Accident Response Organization and begins moving specialized personnel toward Thule immediately. The operational designation for what follows is Project Crested Ice. In the language of the United States military, this is a broken arrow event, a nuclear accident involving the unintentional dispersal of nuclear material without nuclear detonation, and it is one of the most severe in American history. The scale of the cleanup that Project Crested Ice requires is almost impossible to convey in abstract terms. The contaminated area, once properly surveyed by radiological teams, extends across approximately 4.8 kilometers of frozen bay surface. Wreckage from the aircraft is embedded throughout. Burning jet fuel has melted sections of the ice, creating pockets of contaminated slush that are slowly refreezing. Radioactive debris is scattered in unpredictable patterns determined by the direction and force of the conventional explosion, not by any organized logic that would make systematic removal straightforward. Approximately 700 American military personnel and Danish civilian workers are deployed to the cleanup operation across its 9-month duration. They work in conditions that strain the limits of human endurance. Polar night means they operate in complete darkness, illuminated by floodlights, vehicle headlamps, and portable work lights. The temperature rarely rises to a point where exposed skin is safe for more than minutes. The contaminated ice must be physically removed by hand and by machine, shoveled, scraped, bulldozed, and lifted into massive steel storage containers. The logistics of removing 6,700 cubic meters of contaminated ice, snow, and aircraft wreckage from a frozen bay in the Arctic are extraordinary. Steel drums filled with contaminated material are sealed by welding. Those drums are loaded into shipping containers. The containers are moved across the ice to transport vehicles, transferred to a cargo ship, and sailed across the Atlantic to the Savannah River site in South Carolina, a Department of Energy installation with the industrial capacity to receive and permanently store radioactive waste on this scale. What the workers are handling every day on the ice of North Star Bay is not disclosed to them in its full chemical specificity. They are issued radiation dosimetry badges. They are given protective equipment. But the protective equipment, evaluated against what we now understand about the contamination at the site, is wholly inadequate. Fabric face coverings over the nose and mouth, standard military cold weather gear, no positive pressure respirators, no sealed protective suits capable of preventing inhalation of microscopic alpha-emitting particles. A dosimetry badge measures external exposure to gamma and beta radiation. It records the radiation arriving at the surface of the body from outside. It does not and cannot measure the dose delivered internally by plutonium particles lodged within lung tissue after being inhaled. A worker who spends 8 hours shoveling contaminated snow while wearing a fabric face mask may return at the end of his shift with a dosimetry badge reading that places his recorded external exposure comfortably within the established safe limits. The plutonium he inhaled during those 8 hours is now physically embedded in his lung tissue. It will irradiate the surrounding cells continuously from the inside for the remainder of his life. The badge records none of this, but even as Project Crested Ice proceeds through the brutal winter and into the Arctic spring, a problem emerges that cannot be solved by shovels and steel drums. One of the 4 B-28 bombs is not accounted for. The radiological survey teams identify primary components from 3 of the weapons in the debris field. The 4th weapon's components are only partially recovered. The heavier structural elements, the dense uranium secondary, the pit assembly components, the primary casing substructures, are absent from the surface debris. The working theory developed by the investigation team and subsequently confirmed by classified internal analysis is deeply uncomfortable. When the conventional explosives detonated on impact, the force of the blast drove downward as well as outward. The sea ice of North Star Bay, though frozen to substantial depth in January, is not a uniform solid surface. The heat of the burning fuel had already compromised sections of the ice before the final impact. The explosive force of the detonation may have driven the heavy fissile components of the 4th weapon through weakened ice and into the freezing water below. The bottom of North Star Bay beneath the impact zone is approximately 300 meters deep. The water temperature is near freezing. A search using available underwater technology is conducted in the months following the crash. The sonar equipment available in 1968 for this kind of precision search in Arctic conditions is limited. The acoustic returns from the seabed are complex, partially obscured by the density of metallic aircraft debris scattered across the search zone. The heavy components of the 4th bomb cannot be positively identified. The search is eventually concluded without recovery. The 4th weapon is classified as unrecovered. It remains classified as unrecovered to this day. Somewhere on the floor of North Star Bay, beneath 300 meters of Arctic seawater, the fissile components of a 1.1 megaton thermonuclear weapon lie exactly where the blast drove them in January 1968. The plutonium, 239 in those components, will not decay to radiological insignificance for approximately 240,000 years. Modern civilization has existed for roughly 10,000 years. The United States government classifies the full operational details of the Hobo 28 crash. This is not unusual. Nuclear accidents involving classified weapon systems are automatically handled within highly compartmentalized classification frameworks. But the classification of the Thule incident has dimensions beyond standard nuclear security protocols. The crash cannot be entirely concealed from the Danish government. The enormous military response operation at Thule Air Base is visible. The settlement of Pituffik is nearby. Danish news organizations report on the incident. The Danish government is informed that a B-52 has crashed in North Star Bay. It is informed that a major cleanup operation is underway. What the Danish government is not formally told is that the aircraft was carrying nuclear weapons. The United States government declines to confirm the presence of nuclear weapons aboard Hobo 28, citing its standard policy of neither confirm nor deny. Under this framework, the American government neither acknowledges that its aircraft were routinely flying nuclear-armed patrols over Danish territory in direct violation of Danish law, nor that the crash has scattered thermonuclear weapon components across a Danish bay. The Danish public is not deceived exactly. The scale of the American military response to the crash makes the nature of the accident reasonably obvious to anyone paying attention. But official diplomatic confirmation is absent. The classified framework holds, and the Danish workers who participate in the cleanup return home carrying what they carry in their lungs. In the years following Project Crested Ice, a pattern begins to emerge among the men who work the cleanup. Pulmonary conditions appearing in workers with no prior history of respiratory disease, cancers developing at rates and in types that are statistically unusual for their age cohorts and their occupational histories. The pattern is consistent across both American veterans and Danish civilian workers, and it is consistent with what the medical literature on plutonium exposure would predict. The compensation fight that follows is one of the longest and most bitterly contested episodes in Cold War occupational health history. American veterans file claims with the Department of Veterans Affairs. The initial response is denial. The official recorded radiation exposures from the dosimetry badges issued during Project Crested Ice fall below the established thresholds for presumptive service connection. The government's position is that the documented exposure does not meet the statutory threshold for compensation. This position is technically defensible only if you accept the dosimetry data as a complete and accurate record of the actual exposure experienced by the cleanup workers. The badge data records external gamma and beta exposure. It records nothing about internal alpha exposure from inhaled particles. If the dosimetry methodology cannot measure the primary exposure pathway relevant to the worker's subsequent illnesses, the data is not a complete record. It is a partial record that the compensation framework treats as a comprehensive one. The Danish government takes a different approach. In the late 1980s, the Danish government commissions an independent epidemiological study of the Danish workers who participated in the Thule cleanup. The study examines the health outcomes of the Danish Thule worker cohort against a matched control population with no nuclear exposure history. The results show statistically significant elevations in specific cancer rates within the Thule worker group. The Danish government uses this finding as the basis for establishing a formal compensation program for affected Danish workers. American veterans continue fighting for decades. The legislative path through the Veterans Administration and through Congress is slow, contested, and partial. Veterans and their families repeatedly encounter bureaucratic frameworks built around other types of nuclear exposure. Atmospheric test veterans, uranium miners, shipyard workers, that do not neatly account for the specific exposure profile of the Thule cleanup. The battles over recognition, over presumptive eligibility, over the adequacy of the dosimetry records, extend through the 1990s and into the 2000s. The men who spent months on the ice of North Star Bay in the winter of 1968 find themselves fighting a second battle for 30 years after they came home. The full classified record of the Hobo 28 crash, the nature of the weapons carried, the extent of the contamination, and the official assessment of the missing fourth bomb is not formally declassified until 2008, 40 years after the aircraft hit the ice. When those documents are released, they confirm in official terms the full architecture of what happened and what was concealed. The aircraft was carrying 4 nuclear weapons. The weapons were aboard in direct violation of Danish law and in contradiction of the public position of the Danish government. The cleanup exposed workers to significant radioactive contamination through an exposure pathway that the dosimetry methodology could not measure. The 4th weapon was not recovered, and its components are assessed as remaining on the seabed of North Star Bay. The political impact in Denmark is significant. The declassified record confirms what many in Denmark had suspected for years, that the Atlantic Alliance had been managed at the operational level through a layer of deliberate diplomatic concealment that bypassed the democratic accountability of member states. The Danish government that had publicly maintained its non-nuclear identity throughout the Cold War had been hosting American nuclear weapons over its territory continuously, and the political management of that contradiction had been handled through silence. The Danish public reaction is complicated. There is genuine anger. There is recognition. There's a kind of historical accounting that is both necessary and exhausting. The Cold War had required decisions whose full dimensions could not be made publicly without fracturing the alliance that the decisions were designed to protect. Denmark was not unique in this. The history of NATO nuclear arrangements is full of similar gaps between public posture and operational reality. The Danish experience with Thule is simply one of the most concrete and most physically consequential examples of that gap. The irony that runs through the entire history of Hobo 28 is characteristic of the Cold War's deepest contradictions. The United States built and deployed the most sophisticated airborne nuclear deterrent in history. It maintained Operation Chrome Dome for a decade at immense cost to personnel, to aircraft, to diplomatic relationships with the Allies, whose territory the program used without acknowledgement. It did so on the explicit premise that the survivability of the retaliatory capability against a Soviet first strike was the foundation of strategic stability. If the bombers could not be destroyed on the ground, the Soviets would not dare strike. The war would not happen. And then a seat cushion caught fire. The 4 weapons aboard Hobo 28 were never supposed to reach their designated targets. They were supposed to orbit. They were supposed to exist as an implicit promise, a thermonuclear guarantee held continuously aloft in the Arctic sky. The deterrence worked, in the largest sense. The nuclear exchange that Chrome Dome was designed to deter never happened. But the cost of maintaining the deterrence was paid by Sergeant Leonard Shepard, who went down with the aircraft on the ice of North Star Bay. It was paid by 700 men who shoveled plutonium and beryllium into sealed drums in the polar darkness for 9 months, wearing fabric masks and carrying dosimetry badges that measured the wrong thing. It was paid by the Danish workers who came home carrying what they carried and spent the following years developing illnesses that their government eventually compensated, and the American government spent decades contesting. It was paid by the families of American veterans who fought through administrative frameworks that were not designed to see the particular exposure. The cleanup operation that removed 6,700 cubic meters of contaminated material from North Star Bay was funded by the United States military. The compensation that was eventually extended to affected Danish workers was funded by the Danish government. The classified diplomatic management of the entire affair, the legal architecture of neither confirm nor deny, the 4 decades of withheld information, all of it was administered by the same institutional framework that had decided in the early 1960s that maintaining continuous nuclear-armed overflights of Danish territory was operationally necessary and diplomatically manageable. It was both of those things, and it cost exactly what it cost. Today, the most persistent question about the Hobo 28 crash is the simplest one. Why has no recovery operation ever been launched for the missing 4th bomb? The technological barriers that prevented a thorough underwater search in 1968 no longer exist. Remotely operated vehicles, capable of precision operations at 300-meter depths, are standard equipment in both military and commercial oceanographic operations. Modern multi-beam sonar systems can produce extraordinarily detailed maps of complex seabeds. The acoustic returns that made precise identification difficult in 1968 are no longer the limiting factor they once were. The official position of the United States government is that the unrecovered components pose no immediate environmental threat in their current location. The intense cold of the Arctic seawater has immobilized the material, The sediment accumulation over 56 years has further encapsulated it. A recovery operation, the argument runs, would risk disturbing the settled material and redistributing it through the water column, potentially creating a wider dispersal event than the one currently contained in the seabed. This is a technically defensible argument. It is also an argument that happens to align perfectly with the institutional preference of every government involved to treat the Thule incident as settled history rather than an active problem requiring resources, attention, renewed international negotiation with Denmark, and public acknowledgement of a thermonuclear weapon sitting on the floor of a foreign nation's territorial waters. The plutonium-239 on the seabed of North Star Bay does not share the government's preference for settled history. Its half-life of 24,100 years makes no allowance for diplomatic convenience. The Arctic environment is not static. Ice dynamics are changing. Seabed sediment patterns shift. The encapsulation that is currently cited as the basis for leaving the material in place is not guaranteed to remain intact across the geological timescales relevant to the material's radioactive persistence. Operation Chrome Dome was discontinued as a continuous program within days of the Hobo 28 crash, suspended pending review and never fully reinstated. The strategic deterrence mission shifted over the following years towards submarine-launched ballistic missile systems whose survivability did not depend on keeping aircraft continuously aloft over the territories of allies whose laws prohibited the weapons those aircraft carried. The B-52 retained its nuclear delivery role, but the age of permanent airborne nuclear alert ended in the bay below Thule Air Base on January 21, 1968. The sea ice of North Star Bay has frozen and thawed through 56 successive Arctic winters since the night Hobo 28 came down. The surface shows nothing of what happened there. The bay looks exactly as it looked before the aircraft arrived. Cold, dark in winter, empty. Beneath it, 300 meters down, something waits that no human hand has touched since the moment it went through the ice. The documents that kept it classified were released in 2008. The bomb itself has not moved.